Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. In the cramped room, which the unlucky ones bypassed, proudly called the workshop, it was unbreathable from tobacco smoke. But the mail company did not pay attention to this unpleasant circumstance. Only Jacob diligently half-voiced grumbled, "Men, finish poisoning the atmosphere. There's nothing to breathe." David earned Jacob's father. Instead of leaving like a woman on the maid of honor, you should have followed his bad example. Take a few puffs and life seems cool. The last phrase of the local breeder pronounced in an advertising manner and again went and from laughter. But Jacob only smiled and looked at his comrade with condemnation. "No way. I will not deliberately poison myself. I have never been into this business, and I don't advise you." Alex, the youngest in the brigade, finished another sandwich and wiped his hands. "Jacob has a point. I'm going to quit smoking too. My wife gave me a scheme. She dug it up somewhere on the internet. If you follow it, you can be a non-smoker in 2 weeks." David said with an arrogant smile. "All these schemes are for suckers like you." "Alex, personally, I'm not going to deny myself small pleasures because I don't want to die healthy." On the rights of the eldest, Nick raised his voice. "Guys, what are you on the wrong topic? Probably forgot that the main reason for our today's event is the birthday of our comrade, and we can even say, the labor striker Jacob." And David slapped himself on the knee with all his might. "He's definitely the foreman. We're in the wrong woods, which means we need a drink to clear our heads. And another round." He solemnly lifted the bottle and filled his glass with a magician's dexterity. "So, gentlemen, let's pour to the brim, and I'll toast our Jacob." David poked and prodded and ran the pads of his fingers over his lips in embarrassment. "I apologize, brothers, for the oversight. It was my brotherly way of putting it. In short, Jacob, I will be a little wordy, or the fluid in the vessels will boil. Good health to all your organs, and more money in your pockets." The rest of the campaigners followed their friend's example and drained their glasses. Taking advantage of the pause, David continued to develop the theme of the day. "Jacob, with all our respect for you, I have to put you on the spot." David raised his eyebrows in surprise. "I don't quite get it. What are you implying?" David did not even have time to open his mouth, as he was ahead of him. "Alex, David means that you didn't warn us about the upcoming celebration. If we didn't know you well, we would think that you don't want to introduce yourself." He said all this in a curt voice, but he couldn't dodge the punishment. David gave him a good slap. "What are you, a rookie, always meddling where you're not wanted? In the Navy they punish such liberties mercilessly, better than grown-ups. Listen." Alex tried to tell David that "You're always humiliating me. By the way, I'm quite an adult, an independent man. I even managed to get married." David condescendingly looked at the guy. "Alex, the level of maturity of a man is determined by intelligence, not by life." The men laughed amicably, even the always serious one. Nick began to burst out laughing. "Oh, you have a tongue like a pomelo. Why did you offend the guys? Maybe they have a modern youth, everything is different, and they think in the wrong place that should be." Alex jumped up as if he'd been surrounded by a snake in his soft spot. But David grabbed his arm. "Sit down and don't boil. You have to be able to take criticism. You take offense like a young lady in the Navy. That's not allowed. They'd break them quickly." David filled the glasses. "I hope, Jacob, you won't mind if I suggest a drink to those at sea. There is a tradition in the Navy that the third toast is always drunk to those who are far from their native shores." Alex opened his mouth, but Nick looked at the young upstart so expressively that he was speechless. Jacob was the first to drink. The others followed him. "Among my friends were those who devoted their lives to the sea, and one of my buddies was a crewman. He'd just been transferred to this submarine in August, just before the disaster." There was a long pause, and David realized that it was necessary to lead the company out of the deadlock of sadness. "Guys, this isn't going to work. We're not at a wake. Let's have 5 more drops, and I'll tell you what happened to me just the other day." Nick winked at Jacob. "Now David will tell jokes." David leisurely drank and took a bite of lemon slices. All of Nick's anecdotes come from life. "Just last shift I was doing my rounds. Remember, it rained for 24 hours. But service is service, and I put on the rain and went to check my site. Since the bike was not to pass, went on their own too. About that I was from the station about 2 kilometers, and maybe more. And it was already starting to get dark. God forbid the weather. I was walking and saw something moving on the rails in the distance. The first thing that came to mind was that someone was drunk, and the train was scheduled to come. So I pick up the pace. I'm running and I'm thinking, I don't want to witness someone else's death." David was an excellent storyteller, and in a minute all the men were sitting, frozen in anticipation of the denouement. Alex even opened his mouth, and he burst out involuntarily. "What a horror! And who was there on the rails?" David looked at everyone present with a meaningful look. "A mermaid. There was a real mermaid with a tail and carnals." Nick kicked himself on the knee, but apparently he had not calculated the force of the blow and grimaced with pain. "David, you and your nonsense of honey of sin. How can a mermaid be on a railroad? Tell me a favor. You didn't take any of that before your rounds, did you? What are you, Nick? How can you suspect me? I don't break discipline in the workplace. Then how do you explain a mermaid showing up on the tracks?" David wasn't even embarrassed. "When I was in the Navy, I had a thing for mermaids. And they've been after me for a quarter of a century. And even my purely land-based profession doesn't stop them." Jacob stopped the joker. "All right, cut the crap. I also had a similar case last year, but the trap then fell into a young classic. Almost got her out of the death trap in time. But the mermaid is something out of the ordinary." The man made an upward spiral with his hand. David poured some vodka into his glass and knocked it over. "You don't believe me? I thought you wouldn't believe me. That's why I took a picture of the little mermaid on my cell phone. Look." David's cell phone changed hands, but the men couldn't say a word. Only Alex was reading confusedly. "A real mermaid. And she's all dressed up. Only seaweed is missing." Sour faces of comrades pleased the storyteller, and he even sang something like a circus march. "Men, I almost died of fear myself. Imagine, evening, rain, near the woods, and that's wise. Right on the tracks. The solution is simple. The girl has fallen behind the car. She, together with her troupe of artists, traveled to cities and towns to amuse children, and the role was allocated. A mermaid and bee. They gave her very few words. Here the girl, and took offense. And in the break between performances, she trouble poured strong drinks and drank too much. But it seems she was not the only one in the team. When she had to go to the bathroom, she decided to get away from the road and came back the car. The trail was gone." Alex is excited about David's story. "What happened next?" The man shrugged. "It's no big deal. I'm the Little Mermaid. At the police station, she was having trouble getting around on her own. Her tail was in the way, and she'd had too much to drink. When the cops saw who I brought them, they laughed nonstop for an hour, but then they drew up a protocol and returned the Little Mermaid. At the place of registration, Jacob thanked a comrade. "Thank you, David. You also gave us a lot of fun today. In fact, I haven't had such a heartwarming birthday in a long time." Nick wagged his finger at him. "And you wanted to hide that fact from us. Thank you, Peter. He's the one who informed us. The only bad thing is, Jacob, you're on shift today. If you'd given me a heads up, I could have filled in for you. Or Alex." Quietly, he nodded his head in disagreement. "Sure, I would have switched with you. It's not good to work on your own birthday. I haven't paid attention to such events for a long time. And you guys, thanks for the company. You're my soul today, or what?" David couldn't pass up an opportunity to speak his mind. "Yeah, we're always ready. especially when there's something bubbling in the vessel. You'll be on duty without adventure. After what you told David, I'm gonna be seeing mermaids everywhere." The men began to disperse, and Jacob quickly got out of sight. Down with the remnants of the festive feast, he looked at his watch and hurried. It was already 7:30. We should have time to check out the main area before the speeding train passed. The man pulled on a jacket with reflective elements and headed for the exit, but at the door he bumped into the cashier. Clara carefully clutched something to her chest and from surprise exclaimed, "Oh, Jacob, you are already leaving. I saw that the men had gone home and decided to visit you." The man stood there and did not know what to say to this nice woman, who had been making very clear signs of attention to him for a long time. "I'm sorry, Clara. I'm in a hurry. It's getting dark. I'm going on my rounds." The woman was embarrassed. "I won't keep you. I just wanted to treat you to some homemade pastries. It's your birthday, so I thought." Jacob felt awkward and wanted to refuse the gift, but he noticed how the woman's hands were trembling with excitement and realized that his refusal would offend her. "Thank you, Clara. The woman is happy. Treats here pies with cabbage and meat. And donuts, too. I'm not aware of your gastronomic preferences, so I decided to write with different fillings. After all men like pies with cabbage and meat." The woman looked at him expectantly. And in this look, Jacob saw the hope for the most ordinary female happiness. The man accepted the package. "Thank you very much, but I can't eat that much on my own. I don't want such delicious things to go to waste. I make the dough according to a special recipe. That's why my pies don't dare for days." He didn't want to go back to the workshop, so he put the bag of pies in his travel bag. Jacob's back felt Clara giving him a long look, but he didn't look back. He just thought how many birthdays I've had in my life. But this is probably the first one in many years that has given me some joy. Over the years, Men has well studied the route, and during the obligatory raid thought about the strangeness of his life. He used to love holidays in the circle of friends back in his distant youth, but then, after the tragedy that happened to him, everything changed dramatically, and Alex began to hate even his own birthdays. This morning, too, he thought with irritation that another joyless year of his life had flown by. But coworkers and Clara and her hotels had struck strings in his soul that he thought had been ringing for a long time. August evenings increasingly reminded him of the near arrival of fall had not also become noticeably shorter. Therefore, Jacob reached the final point of his checkup raid when it was already quite dark. Right on schedule. An ambulance rushed past, throwing small stones in different directions. The man muttered, "It's time to turn on our little flashlight, or I'm going to get in trouble on my own birthday." Jacob reached into his tool bag for the flashlight signal, and his hand came across something warm. He exclaimed, "Pies from Clara." It was about time for a refreshment. He looked around and saw nearby the hulk that remained of a small wooden structure. Not long ago, it had been a small booth to shelter from the rain and wind. Jacob joined the rickety wall and retrieved a still warm pastry from the bag. What a delicious odor! Just the smell of homemade pastries awakened his incredible appetite, and he sent a message to the caring cashier in the dark. "Thank you so much again, Clara." This reckless act awakened a youthful excitement in the soul of a mature man, and he winked at the stars that were peeking at him from above. "What do you think? Maybe happiness will smile on me too." The sky lanterns answered him. But suddenly, in the middle of the evening meal, a cell phone beeped. During the rounds, Jacob always hid the device in the inner pocket of his jacket. This call took him by surprise, and he hastily began to wipe his hands on the grass. "Damn it, who's trying to contact me at this inopportune time?" Suddenly, the thought flashed through his brain that it was his son, finally remembering his father's birthday. The man rejoiced, but said aloud, "All day long I've been waiting for your congratulations, and you remembered about me only at night." The cell phone continued to ring insistently, and the man easily removed the device from his pocket. He didn't even look at the glowing screen and immediately shouted, "Liam, why are you so late?" But he was answered by a painfully familiar female voice, and everything went cold in his chest at once. "Jacob, it's me who bothered you. Liam can't call. We're in big trouble." The voice of the ex-wife snapped her tears. Jacob shouted excitedly to Adriana, "Explain exactly what happened. What kind of trouble did you just say? Is there anything I can do to help?" All these questions remained unanswered, and the sobs still echoed through the phone. For a minute he urged the woman to calm down, and she finally said to Jacob, "You'd better come and do it as soon as possible. Bitch, explain to this one what happened there. Jacob, come. Our son Liam is sick. I'm sorry, I can't talk anymore." There were short beeps, and the man couldn't move. He was frozen in a dumb stupor, and in just 1 second all his almost 50 years flashed before his eyes. He was brought out of his stupor by the loud horn of a diesel locomotive. Jacob looked at his watch and in confusion commented that it was a freight train, so it was already 10:30. His nerves instantly tensed, and his brain began to work hard on what he was going to do in the coming hours and minutes. The man jumped on his bike, and within half an hour he was at the station. There was no one in the building except the night watchman and the cashier Clara. The woman looked at Jacob with surprise. "What's wrong? You don't have a face." The man was immersed in his own unhappy thoughts, so he answered almost blankly, "Yes, something has happened, and I have to leave immediately. But I'm at a complete loss. I don't know what to do. The only thing I know is that I have to go to Springfield." He had a hopeful look in his eyes, and Clara immediately suggested the only correct solution. "You need to get on a plane. It'll go faster. Julia, my daughter, should be here any minute. She always meets me. When I work the evening shift, she has this very, as they say, smartphone. You can quickly get all the information about upcoming flights, and you can even book a ticket. That's good. How am I gonna get to the state? Yeah, it can't take the strain. It'll fall apart halfway through. You give our Alex a call. I'm sure he won't refuse you." Everything that happened next was more like a surreal dream. The cashier's daughter clarified the schedule and booked a ticket for the nearest flight. And just 10 minutes after the call drove up on his brand new Audi Alex, the guy did not know what the alarm was about and cheerfully reported a personal cab for the birthday boy arrived. "Really, I'll have to put my brother behind the wheel because I drank a little bit on your namesake. Although it's all gone out of my head now. But I don't want to get in trouble." Jacob thanked guys. "Thanks, Alex, for the encouragement. I absolutely don't care who is driving as long as I don't miss my plane. My flight is on the 18th. I just need to notify my bosses that I have an emergency." Jacob dialed the number of his high school friend Peter. Despite the late hour, the chief immediately picked up the phone. "Jacob, I already know. The watchman called and said that you are in trouble. Go, then we'll deal with the formalities. I've already warned Poplawski. He's agreed to cover for you." Jacob hasn't been on an airplane in over 20 years. He rarely left the small town where he spent his childhood. He didn't remember his father. He knew only from his mother's stories that William was a very respectable man, like most of the men in the family. William dreamed of becoming a machinist. After graduating from a railroad technical school, he was an assistant for several years, and then he drove trains on the railroads of a huge country. It seemed that in the fate of this young guy who never fought, everything was written on points, and only luck accompanies him on the way. But one day in the swooning current of everyday life interfered with the accident of William's life, broke off at the very takeoff. He was killed by a thug when he stood up for an elderly woman. Kelly considered it her sacred duty to cherish the memory of her husband's heroic deed. She often told her young son how his father had saved a complete stranger. Dad was on his way home. After the ride, he stopped at the station when it was almost midnight and took a shortcut home through the park. There he noticed suspicious shadows. Then he heard a woman's cry for help. He recognized the voice as that of an elderly cashier and rushed to the call. The unfortunate woman was grabbed by the throat by a man. Clad in all black, your dad, without thinking, rushed at him. He didn't even realize at first that the thug had stabbed him. He thought he'd just been stabbed in the stomach. Only then did he notice that all his clothes were swollen with blood. Aunt Cindy, the cashier he saved, immediately called an ambulance, but by the time the paramedics arrived, Dad had lost consciousness. Jacob knew that his father did not die immediately. After a serious injury, the man even went on the mend. But then his condition deteriorated sharply, and on the 8th day, after the tragedy, he passed away, and he and his mom were left alone. Kelly could not love anyone else and devoted her whole life to the upbringing of her only son. From the time he was a little boy, she instilled in him, "Daddy really wanted you to become a machinist too. So do your best, study hard." The boy did not understand much and pelted his mother with questions. "Mommy, how do you know what Daddy wanted? He was dead, and the dead can't talk." The woman smiled and affectionately rubbed her son's golden curls. "When you were first born, Daddy immediately said that you would continue the dynasty of railroaders." Jacob immediately asked a counter question. "Mommy, do train drivers look like czars?" "Only czars have these dynasties. Our teacher told us." Kelly had to patiently explain to her son that there are dynasties in the world: doctors, teachers, and many other professions. And Jacob resigned himself to the idea that he would have to continue the baton of his ancestors. He focused his attention on books describing the work of a machinist every year on his birthday. His mother gave him themed toys, steam locomotives, or a composite railroad. But in the 6th grade, everything changed dramatically, and Jacob had a different hobby and a completely different main goal in life. These changes were connected with the arrival in their school of a young physical education teacher, Thomas. Then Jacob, like many of his peers, had a special fondness for active pastime. In the summer, he together with the boys raced the ball in the school stadium, and in winter he took out a fashionable blue duct tape hockey stick. It was this equipment, which had seen the sights, that was the boy's main value. Jacob dreamed that one day the day would come, and he would have a real stick, such as NHL players. But his thoughts did not go further than his dreams, because the boy understood perfectly well that his mother could not buy him such expensive sports equipment. In winter, after every backyard match, Jacob patiently repaired his tool. Kelly silently watched her son and sighed because she was unable to realize her son's dream. But one day she advised him, "Jacob, you would enroll in the section at school. There you will get a good club and uniform. At our work, women said that they sent a new gym teacher to your school, and it seems that he played on the junior team." The boy was both pleased and surprised by such a participation on the part of his mother. "Mom, thanks for the helpful information. We do have a new gym teacher, but I didn't even know that he plays hockey." The next day, the 6th grader was already looking for a convenient moment to talk to the young gym teacher face to face. Such a moment presented itself at the big recess when Thomas was on his way to the teacher's lounge. Jacob skipped along behind him. "Thomas, can I talk to you for a minute?" The teacher stopped and eyed the teenager with interest. "I'm listening to you, young man." So mature. No one had ever addressed his colleague before, so he felt a little uncomfortable. And the former fervor of fear began to fade slowly. But it was too late to retreat, and Jacob quietly mumbled, "Thomas, please enroll me in your section or circle. I do not know exactly. I want to really play hockey." Thomas looked into the boy's eyes, and that kind but shrewd look of the first coach Jacob remembered for the rest of his life. But it was the words of the PE coach that carved into his memory the most. Sport is not only a school of high achievements. A person who decides to seriously devote himself to this business must be able to think logically and also and clearly state these thoughts. The teenager's face and ears were burning with shame, and there was something unpleasantly defensive in his eyes. Jacob wanted to run away, but the gym teacher caught him by the arm. "Wait, and they told you everything?" The teacher got back into the teenager's face. "There is another prerequisite for an athlete. You have to know how to lose. So which section do you wish to enroll in?" Jacob took a deep breath and, looking straight into the teacher's eyes, blurted out, "I told you I want to play hockey." Thomas patted the boys on the shoulder approvingly. Now that's a different matter. I don't think I teach gym class in your class. Or am I wrong? Did the boy report Boyko again? No, that's right. I'm in 6th grade. Do you teach 7th grade? Well, it's a small thing. If you really have an interest in a popular sport, come by Friday night. We'll see what you can do. This important conversation took place on Wednesday, so Jacob could not wait for Friday. The next 2 days, he got up early in the morning and jogged around the house. Then he'd warm up for half an hour. Kelly realized that something serious was going on with her son, but she didn't ask him any unnecessary questions. And when a neighbor asked Kelly what it is that your Jacob runs around in the morning like a wife, he was fine. She replied to the nosy woman, "He's fine. You don't have to worry about my son. It's just that he's decided to get serious about sports." The neighbor shook her head disapprovingly. Everyone's looking for an easy life today. My grandchildren are playing ball too, and I'm against it. If everyone started playing sports, who would work the land and the farm? Kelly listened to the woman with a smile and then said sports is not only glory, but also hard work, which hardens the spirit. And such hobbies of children should be encouraged by adults. The neighbor did not answer anything, but by the expression on her face, it was easy to guess that she remained in her opinion. The long-awaited Friday came, and Jacob anxiously awaited the evening at the appointed time. He timidly entered the gym where the training had already started. Thomas waved to him in a friendly manner. "Jacob, come and meet the team." The guys received him kindly, and by the end of the first session it seemed that he had been training with these guys for at least a year. But the section had its own rules, about which the newcomer was immediately informed by the team captain Sam. "Jacob, we have very strict requirements Thomas has set here. Any violation will result in expulsion. So if you have problems with your studies, you can forget about training. Also, no language, no swearing, no fighting, no unexcused absences from practice. Also on that list. So it's better to assess your capabilities right away." But the list of severe restrictions for a teenager did not temper the ardor of the young athlete, but on the contrary, awakened in him persistence and desire to achieve his goal at all costs. It so happened that Jacob was the youngest in the school team. But after the first few months of regular training, the boy discovered a rare talent for such an age. Thomas openly admired the boy and often shared in the teacher's lounge with his colleagues. And this boy is a real diamond. It's a pity that such a capable boy is lost in a small provincial town. He'd be in good hands, but in those distant times sports schools in rural areas were rare, and the boy's mother did not plan to move to another place. Chance found the talented junior. One day, Thomas came to the training session in high spirits and said, "Guys, next week we will go to the regional center. There will be a friendly meeting with the gymnasium team." All the boys shouted with one voice, "Yay! Thomas, we're going to show the townspeople what is real hockey." Only the team captain, against all logic, disappointedly jumped to his feet. "What are you rejoicing about? It's a hopeless case. We're definitely going to lose." But Jacob strongly disagreed. "That's it. You're the captain. You're supposed to keep the boys focused on winning. With that attitude, of course we're going to lose. You forget what Thomas said about believing in winning." Sam looked at the daredevil with hatred and muttered early, "It's Jacob who's casting your vote, so sit back and breathe. Your number is 16. But Jacob was not embarrassed by this fun, and he began to vigorously defend his opinion. A heated argument ensued between the team members while the coach watched his pets from the sidelines. At the end of practice, he called out to Jacob, and the team froze in anticipation. The gym teacher waited for the allotted pause and said decisively, "Guys, I want to make a reshuffle in the lineup. Let Jacob take the place of the center forward for this game, and Vejo will move to defense." Sam looked obliquely at the coach, but did not say anything. That day, the captain realized for the first time that he was losing his authority. It was a heavy blow to the teenager's ego. and he immediately identified the culprit of the unpleasant circumstance: Jacob. The friendly match was held with full stands of the sports complex, and the substitutions made by the coach had a positive impact on the game. Only Sam, the whole game, discreetly put sticks in the wheels of the new forward of the team. But such setups caused Jacob only rage, and he alone sent 3 pucks into the opponent's goal. As a result, the match ended cleanly and with the victory of the Thomas team. It was the first furor in the life of a provincial boy. The boys rocked Jacob in their arms for a long time, because it was the young forward who contributed the lion's share. He was congratulated and shook hands with complete strangers. And such a public confession at first shocked the guy, so he tried to hide in the locker room. But as soon as Jacob closed the door of this soulful room behind him, Thomas appeared, accompanied by a strange man. "Jacob wants to meet you, Ethan." The boy looked at the man with all his eyes and was afraid to believe that it was the same coach whose name rattled all over the world. Ethan was a good psychologist and understood what was going on in the teenager's soul. He gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "I won't beat around the bush, but I'll get right to the point. And I'm recruiting a new junior team. I watched your game very closely today, and with all your shortcomings, do you have any prospects for growth? If you're seriously thinking about playing a big sport, here's my hand." Ethan extended his hand, and Jacob shook it as an equal. Further events spiraled its spiral. Ethan personally traveled to the town of Utah to speak to the mother, a talented boy. Of course, Jacob was not present during the conversation that decided his fate. But when Ethan left, Kelly held her son tightly to her and whispered to him, "Sonny, it happens. Once in a lifetime you are kissed by good luck, and you should not lose this, perhaps the only chance." From that day on, life spun at breakneck speed, and the name Jacob began to appear more and more often on the pages of newspapers. Sports commentators covering important tournaments also paid attention to the talented striker. Very quickly, Jacob got used to the fact that behind him is a trail of loud fame. Along with success came financial stability. At first, the young man was very cautious about remuneration, but very soon got used to nothing to limit himself. Of course, he helped his mother and even tried to persuade her to move at least to the regional center. But Kelly persisted. "Son, I've gotten used to living here all my life, and at any time I can go to my father's grave." Jacob knew that his mother regularly went to the cemetery, where she shared her joys and sorrows with a man who had long since passed away. This attachment weighed on him, and he wanted very much to change the life of the woman who had given him everything. But since his mother categorically refused to move, he decided to give her an unusual gift during the next vacation and organized a major renovation of their small apartment on the European model. At that time, such transformations were a novelty. And so the neighbors with 6 months went to look at this miracle. "Well done, Jacob. Look at the conditions his mother created in such a nice house. It's not terrible to face old age." Of course, the young sportsman did not forget about his own well-being. He studied in absentia at the Institute of Physical Culture, passing with a squeak sessions between championships of different levels. Jacob made the most grandiose plans for the future because he was in great demand as a legionnaire. This obscure term alarmed many people, especially those accustomed to standards. Kelly, all the same neighbors and work colleagues reprimanded. "Look, Kelly, so that on a crooked road your son did not turn. I can still understand when a person plays for their own, but to chase around the field with a stick for someone else's interest only for the sake of money, it does not come to consciousness." But Jacob paid little attention to such discussions. He was flattered that he is literally on the prowl, trying to get quite famous hockey clubs. Even his mother's warnings he took with skepticism. Mom plays for money on someone else's team. It's a normal practice, and all your worries are for nothing, because nothing bad is gonna happen to me. But with my abilities, I'll be able to make a good life for you and me. Over time, on the background of such hypertrophy popularity, Jacob formed defiant ambitions, and he began to look down on former classmates and friends. especially offended by such arrogant behavior of a friend Peter. Jacob, you would not be very worn. It is very painful to fall from heights, but it's a fair point. Jacob also let it pass, believing that his schoolmate was simply jealous of his success. Between friends, there was a quiet split, and for many years their paths parted. But once out of the risen Lucky still a little brought to his senses the first coach Thomas. Their meeting was fortuitous. When Jacob came to visit his mother for a couple of days, on some sort of naivete, the young man and went to school where they met teacher Thomas. Not immediately, and the tall, handsome man of political physique recognized his former pupil, and only after Jacob rushed to him with hugs. Thomas, don't you recognize me? It's me, Jacob Thomas. After a moment of confusion, Jacob said with admiration, you really do not recognize you. You have grown up, stretched under the ceiling, and you are wearing foreign clothes. This last remark pleased Jacob the most. What can I do, Thomas? I have a little weakness. I like to dress nicely. And then the gym teacher cut him off right away. Any attachment is detrimental to a true athlete. Money, glory, a life of luxury destroys the inner core. The teacher wanted to add something else. But Jacob, forgetting the elementary rules of decorum, cut him off. Thomas, you're telling me this because you yourself have not gone beyond the junior team. Now, looking at me, you regret that at some point stopped in the eyes of Thomas. There's a twinkle in his eye. If you think I'm jealous of you, you're mistaken. It's just that I, Jacob, am used to a sober outlook on life. God didn't give me the talent you have, and I realized in time to find another place in life. Teaching children is also an honorable occupation. Thomas was silent, hesitant to say the main thing. But the former pupil had behaved so defiantly that he said, remember, Jacob, an athlete's career is fleeting, and I don't want you to repeat the unfortunate experience of many athletes who quickly fall out of favor, and then some of them got drunk, and some of them went on the lam. Jacob waved his hand dismissively and interrupted the coach again. I don't know what you're talking about. I'll be fine. I am needed everywhere. To get me, clubs are lining up in line. Thomas looked sadly at the former pupil and hurried to say goodbye. Sorry, Jacob, I don't have time. I'm in a hurry to get to my lesson. Only when Thomas disappeared behind the doors of the school gym, the boy realized that the coach deceived him. What class in July? He just wouldn't talk to me. That's okay. I'm not used to being punked. On a lighter tune, Jacob headed for the station where Kelly was working in the cafeteria. But in a small square, a gypsy woman blocked his way. Wait, soldier, don't hurry. You can't run away from your destiny. No matter how hard you try. Give me your hand. I'll tell you the whole truth. The young man distanced himself from the fortune teller. I do not believe in all this nonsense. Leave me alone. The gypsy shook her head, and like a proud. In vain you are so guy. Remember the word. It is like a husk flies and nothing will remain. Very soon your life will change. You'll be in a lot of pain. Jacob did not want to listen to these prophecies, and he quickly walked towards the station building. But the fortune teller was after him already tonight. You take my words very differently. In just a few hours you will meet a girl who will become your wife, but she will leave you. Jacob switched to running, hoping to disengage himself from the gypsy woman. When he turned pale and appeared near the buffet, Kelly asked Jacob with surprise, "What's wrong? You're not wearing a face." "Yeah, some crazy woman got a hold of me. She started telling me my fate. She said some crazy things." Kelly cast a fleeting glance outside the window, where stood waiting for a new client gypsy. "It's all clear. The hall told you a fortune. She comes here almost every day. The police chase her, but to no avail. They have recently settled in our town in Utah, and not only adults but also children earn money by fortune telling. But what can you do? Is that the tradition in gypsy families? Mom, it doesn't bother me, because I don't believe in any prophecies." The mother looked at her son carefully. "People say that the hall predicts everything exactly. everything comes true. Jacob exclaimed, "Mom, I never thought I had you so drowsy. Throw out of your head all nonsense and believe in good things." With a calm soul, the young man went home to relax. He had originally planned to rest at home for 2-3 days, but toward evening, Coach Jacob called around town. "Get back here right away. You are interested in you from a very famous club, the name of which I will not say yet. But one thing I can say for sure is that the contract is very favorable for 3 years." Inspired by this news, Jacob shouted into the phone, "I'll be there tonight. Thank you for the good news." He hurriedly packed his traveling bag and went to the station, hoping to catch the evening train. When his son appeared in the cafeteria for the second time that day, Kelly exclaimed with surprise, "Jacob, where are you going?" The young man grinned, "Mom, it seems that your predictions in the gym are beginning to come true." The head coach called, demanding to see him. He looked at his watch and smirked enigmatically. "It's 8:00 p.m., and I have until midnight to meet my future bride. That's what the gypsy told me. So Mommy, get ready for the wedding." The pilot left his mother and jumped into the train. Kelly stood on the platform with a confused look, clasping her hands to her chest. In 5 minutes, Jacob had already forgotten about the prophecy of the fortune teller. He was more concerned about the terms of the new contract. His intuition told him that this time he would be much luckier, and he would play for the Czechs or Slovaks. At the terminus, he jumped out of the carriage and almost spiked a girl who was trying to balance her huge suitcase on wheels. The stranger had in no way expected him and let go of the handle out of surprise. The suitcase tipped upside down on its wheels, and the girl shouted indignantly, "Where did you come from? Now I'm definitely here till morning for the country with this damned suitcase." Jacob behaved like a true gentleman and easily lifted the heavy burden. "I'm ready to redeem myself. I order you to go. Where to deliver your suitcase?" The girl was pleased with the unexpected assistant and said in a commanding tone about delivery to the cab stand. Jacob was on a roll. "I can give you a ride. Sit down." The girl looked at him with bewilderment. "Are you a provocateur?" "No, I'd rather walk with my legs to the crowd. Otherwise, they'll think I'm crazy." The young man did not insist on his proposal and rolled the suitcase in the direction indicated. But barely 100 meters away, one wheel of the suitcase fell off. The girl began to lament. "You can't trust these merchants. The guy who sold me this suitcase for a fabulous price assured me that it would last for 10 years at least." To support the conversation, Jacob also began to stigmatize the sellers of low-quality goods. He even gave the example of an unsuccessful purchase of jeans, which after the first wash shrank by 6 sizes. Jacob took the ill-fated suitcase on his shoulder, and the girl shifted behind him on her high heels. The burden was heavy even for a man of such training as the willing helper, and Jacob was already finding it difficult to maintain conversation. Meanwhile, the girl was counting breathlessly. She was telling him about a fabulous vacation in Miami, where she was relaxing with friends. Finally, they went to the cab stand, where a small crew had gathered. The girl simply, without any hint of coquetry, said, "You didn't even ask my name." "This is the first time in my life." Jacob carefully lowered the burden to the sidewalk. "I'm sorry, your cart completely occupied my thoughts. Now I am free of it and can ask you what your name is." The girl held out her graceful hand. "Adriana. Only I'm not related to the famous children's author. It's just that my parents are obsessed with anything that falls under the definition of unusual or original. They're both out of this world. My dad is a therapist, and my mom is also a doctor, but she works with faces and other body parts to create the illusion of beauty." Jacob was struck by the disdain with which the girl spoke of her parents' work. But while he was thinking about it, it was their turn. Adriana stated as if the problem had been solved long ago. "You're not going to leave me alone with this suitcase without a wheel." The young man snapped, "Sure, I'm ready to take you all the way to your apartment." He pushed the suitcase into the trunk with the driver's help and got into the car. "I think I forgot to introduce myself as Jacob. The cab driver reacted instantly. Whoops, isn't the Jacob in my car a hockey player? Jacob smiled. The cab driver handed him his card. Look then, leaving his autograph. I collect celebrity autographs, and it's not uncommon for them to end up in my car. Jacob, with a rehearsed movement, put a signature on the card and looked at his companion. Adriana did not take her curious gaze off him. I wonder what you are famous for. Why does a cab driver know you? The navigator increased his speed and said contentedly, all because, dear young lady, girls are not interested in hockey, although many dream of becoming wives of famous sportsmen. The cab stopped outside the house where the lights lived. Jacob helped the girl to deliver the luggage to the apartment and gallantly said goodbye. It was very nice to meet a girl who had such an unusual name. Adriana grabbed his hand. Are you really just going to leave like that now? There was a note of desperation in her voice, and Alec was confused. Well, we can talk with you a little more, but I really do not have time for me at this very minute. I'm waiting for the head coach. But if you don't mind, we can meet tomorrow. Adriana enthusiastically accepted the offer. The next day, Jacob took care of his business and called his new girlfriend. Adriana picked up after the first ring, and he realized that she had probably been sitting by the phone all day. Their romance developed rapidly, but it wasn't until a week later that Jacob remembered the Gibbs' prediction about the haul. He was amazed. It was just like it happened. So it was fated for me to marry a fire. Although he had no particularly fiery feelings for this lovely girl, the prospect of joining his fate with her was pleasant, and when he proposed to me, she immediately agreed. There was only one slightly unpleasant circumstance that dampened the mood of the future newlyweds. Jacob was to leave immediately after the wedding. Mark, the girl's father, unhappily remarked, the athlete does not have everything like people. These endless training camps, training to exhaustion. I do not understand why it was necessary to hurry with the wedding. On this reasonable question, the young could not answer. The first 3 years of their life together more resembled a series of fleeting dates. Jacob motored between the capital and his hometown, and his young wife looked forward to rare meetings. Only later did he realize that the lights portrayed her as a faithful wife and a sold-out friend. In reality, she was most concerned with the money Jacob was earning. During his absence, the girl did not deny herself anything and party to the full at parties and other fun events. Of course, the husband did not suspect the lifestyle of his young wife. Before the end of the contract, Jacob said to his half, I can no longer live like this and do not want to live. Tired of everything. And the age is not youthful to move here and there. I dream of a normal family. I want to have at least a couple of kids with you. Adriana smiled enigmatically and gently circled his neck with her graceful, liana-like arms. Dear, now is not the time for change, because we are about to have a third member of the family, and that means we'll be spending a lot of money. The man instantly forgot his fatigue. He embarrassed his wife so that she almost suffocated, and then he carried her in his arms for a long time, giving out the most unfulfilled promises. After such news, I am ready to turn mountains. I promise that you are our baby. We'll never, ever need anything. Could he have known then that in making this vow to his wife, he was signing his own sentence? The terms of the new contract he was offered were much harsher than the previous ones. But Jacob was willing to make such sacrifices for the sake of family welfare. Only one circumstance took the young Legionnaire by surprise. As part of the team, whose honor he now had to defend, was his old enemy Sam. But this fact came to light later, when it was impossible to change anything. When the former players of the school teams had first encountered each other in the locker room before practice, Vsevolod Evil hissed at Jacob, "What the hell brought you here? I thought I'd never see you again. And here you are. I warned you to stay away from me." Jacob himself was unpleasant to see the old enemy, and he himself tried to avoid him. But during one significant match, they still had to go out on the ice together. The opponent was serious, and after the first period, Jacob was already exhausted. But he knew that he could not count on a substitute because this condition was stipulated in the contract. There was nothing left but to ask Sam for help. During a short break in the game, Jacob, without further preamble, said, "Listen, Sam, I'm not in the form of a backup today. I'm not a problem. I mean, we're on the same team today." Sam didn't keep his promise. Toward the end of the second period, when a critical situation arose, he was on the other end of the field. There was a big fight. Jacob was attacked by a trio of opposing forwards. One, a particularly aggressive hockey player, swept his stick across his back. After the blow, Jacob was instantly pierced with intolerable pain and fell to the ice. A team doctor came running and gave him an anesthetic shot. Jacob played through to the final, and then barely made it to the locker room, where he was already stretched out on the bench. "Settle it, Sam. That Jacob, they beat you badly." This seemingly innocent question caused the guy's rage. "You're glad they searched you. You promised to cover my rear, and you went off to some unknown place." Sam guiltily, with his eyes downcast. "And how then, in a distant childhood, a year before the village?" "Well, I'm sorry. It just happened. At some point, I completely forgot about you. And when I realized it, it was too late to intervene. Don't worry about it. You know that situations like this often happen during the game. Tomorrow you'll forget about this little mishap." The next morning, Jacob could not get out of bed. His arms worked fine, but his legs refused to obey. He couldn't feel his legs at all. Fear and panic shackled his consciousness. Guy's memory gave away the gypsy woman's cutlass, and he screamed, "Cursed witch! You're the one who gave me the steak." For many months, Jacob had to undergo treatment in different clinics, but medical procedures did not help much. The man was deprived of the ability to move normally and serve his daily needs. Therefore, a wheelchair appeared in their cozy apartment almost simultaneously with the birth of little Liam. But such an object greatly annoyed Agnia, and she, every time passing by the chair, kicked it with her feet. This abnormal habit of the wife served to worsen relations between the spouses. The second factor provoking scandals was the acute lack of money. After all, Adriana is used to living large and did not want to put up with the need to cut back on many items of expenditure. One day she, completely without thinking that she could cause her husband heartache, said with cold directness, "Jacob, I was marrying a healthy man capable of providing for us Liam, but I couldn't imagine having to care for an invalid. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but it's better to tell the truth than to lie for the rest of my life. I'm still young, and I don't plan to spend the rest of my life as your bedside nurse." He was amazed at the cynicism of a woman who had once put her life together. The man even thought for a moment that he had misheard, but when he looked into his wife's eyes, he saw an icy emptiness. "How can you be calm?" Jacob said. "Adriana, I'm not holding you. You may leave." The woman froze. "Wait, are you trying to put me out with a small child?" "No, honey, that's not gonna work. I'm going to go to court to get my share of the estate. I'm your wife, and I'm entitled to half. And Liam is entitled too." That day, Jacob first realized that glory is a passing phenomenon. She is like a star in the night sky, lit up for a short time, and then extinguished. And then a person is left alone with the eternal cold of the universe. Approximately such feelings Jacob felt after that fateful conversation with his wife. More than 2 years dragged litigation, despite the disability of her husband. Adriana did not want to give up her position. In this, she was helped by her father, providing the support of an expensive lawyer. Jacob did not have such a strong rear end, so he had to rely only on his own strength. Although Adriana had moved her belongings out of the apartment, she appeared daily to poison her ex-husband's existence. After a few months of such a troubled life, Jacob became afraid of every call and knock. It was unbearable to live in a mode of constant tension. And during one of the visits of his spouse, he asked Anne, "I do not understand what you are trying to achieve." The woman grinned, thin lips, and laconically answered, "Justice. And you think you are doing right by the press and me. And why did you take Liam away? It's cruel of you to deprive me of seeing my son." Adriana never worried about her husband's mental health and expressed her point of view with straightforward simplicity. Jacob, you don't have to hide behind your disability. Everyone is equal before the law. And about your son, I can tell you one thing. No one is denying you the opportunity to see him. On the contrary, I'm in favor of you being a good father and contributing to Liam's upbringing. You can see your son anytime you want. You know my parents' address. The man shrieked, "Why are you giving birth to all this nonsense if you know perfectly well that I can't move around without help?" The woman smirked snidely, "And that's your problem. I don't care how you're going to deal with them." Adriana looked in his direction with a disgruntled look, and a few seconds later the apartment door slammed loudly. Alex was left alone again with his not cheerful thoughts. He realized that his wife was just mocking him. But there was nothing he could do about it. But time passed. The problems accumulated like a snowball. The solution of the property issue was delayed, and to somehow ease his existence, the man had to hire a nurse. His meager financial resources allowed him to hire an assistant only on an hourly basis. Maria, a nurse from the clinic where he was rehabilitated every 6 months, agreed to such conditions. This kind girl tried unsuccessfully to give him hope. "Jacob, you're acting like a child, and you can't do that. Remember what Michael told you. You have to believe in yourself. There are unique cases in medicine of complete recovery from such serious injuries, so you shouldn't give up hope. You have to believe in yourself and follow your doctor's recommendations." She was full of optimism, which was completely deprived of her intransigence. The patient, since Jacob voluntarily gave his wife all available savings, and he barely had enough for life and medication. Therefore, the services of a caregiver had to be paid by Kelly, who not long ago took a well-deserved vacation. To save a little money, the mother decided to move in with her son for a while. Learning that in the apartment, the fate of which is decided through the court, settled in the mother of the former son-in-law, resented Mark. One day he showed up unannounced, and from the threshold of the scandal, "Kelly, shame on you. You also came here to complicate an already tense situation. My daughter and I regard your interference as a desire to deprive our only grandchild of a roof over his head. If I were you, any grandmother, instead of scheming, would have persuaded her son to give up his claim to this unfortunate apartment." Such blatant insolence angered the woman. Kelly could barely contain the urge to punch the therapist's satisfied face, but she realized what such an act of aggression could threaten her and limited herself to saying no. "Mark, it's not me, and you should be ashamed. It was you and your adventurous daughter who ripped my son off. Even his disability doesn't stop you. But it's not enough you're torturing him. You're also trying to take away his only home." Mark decided to use one last argument. "Stop crying, Kelly. You have a fancy apartment in the city, and instead of crying, you could take your son back to your place and keep an eye on him. And if you have problems in this regard, there are special boarding schools for the infirm. By the way, I can help you with this issue. I have connections." Kelly was stunned. When the meaning of the saint's words came to her, "You degenerate. Are you suggesting I put my own son in boarding school? That will never happen. But you rotter will definitely end up in such an institution one day. Your own daughter will turn you in." The verbal duel was taking place in the hallway, and it is not known how it would have ended if Betty had not intervened. Hearing the shouting, the girl jumped out of Jacob's room and asked the disputants, "Have you no shame? Stop this now." This appeal was mainly addressed to the named guest, but it had the opposite effect. Mark finally lost his temper when he saw the girl. "Oh, I didn't even realize it had gotten this far." William not only had the crazy mom checked out, but he brought the girl into someone else's apartment. Jacob almost from the beginning heard the whole conversation, but did not want to interfere. Only when the father-in-law went beyond the bounds of permissible, he could no longer tolerate. He came out of his hiding place, and as calmly as possible, he asked his ex-wife's father, "Mark, please go away." But the father-in-law was no longer recognizable. "Kind people, look at our miracle on the wheelchairs rolled out. Jacob felt a hot wave sweep over him, and for the first time in 2 years he got to his feet. The terrified father-in-law rushed to the door, and the two women cried with joy. Kelly whispered through her tears, "Oh my God, it's a miracle. Jacob's up." It was only a few seconds. The man stood looking around, but those moments were enough to make him believe in himself again, and he no longer cared about his wife and her father. He didn't want to think about the upcoming court hearing, where the apartment issue was to be finally settled. The man's heart rejoiced at his first victory over his ailment. "Betty's mom, I'm standing. Look, I'm standing." Upon hearing of the miraculous phenomenon, the attending physician was not surprised. It's not a miracle, but a natural reaction to extreme stress. This phenomenon often happens to paralyzed people. Under the influence of strong emotional stress, brain centers are activated. To put it simply, they remember what the body should do in a critical situation. But all this happens reflexively. True, in our case, we can state that there are definitely positive changes. After a detailed examination, Michael advised. Now, it is difficult to say how successful the restoration of function can be, but to speed up the process, it was good to take an additional course in good clinics. Jacob sighed heavily. But such supportive treatment must be very expensive. I can hardly afford such a luxury in the current situation. After all, you can't spread yourself thin on a disabled person's paycheck. Duden didn't answer right away. Unfortunately, today paid medicine can give much more than state clinics. And of course, such a course will not be cheap. But when it comes to health, anyone is ready to sacrifice everything. Many people sell their summer houses and apartments. "Thank you, doctor, I understand. If you could give me the address of this clinic, I'll not only give you the address, but I'll prepare the documents and submit a request. And all this I will do for you for free, Jacob." The doctor smiled and confessed embarrassed. "You know, I am a hockey fan and was a fan of yours, so I would be happy to do something useful for you." Michael kept his promise and called the best clinic in Germany, where a friend of his from the institute worked. Now, all that was left was to get the right amount of money. Kelly encouraged his son. "It's okay, Jacob. We'll figure it out somehow. We can sell my apartment in the town." Jacob dismissed that auction out of hand. "No, Mom, we can still use your place. If the treatment is successful, I'll go back to our nice town and work at the station." "Son, you don't have any special training." "That's okay. I can be a janitor or a stoker. The position doesn't matter." No matter how hard her father tried. The court decided to divide equally the property acquired during the marriage. And it was the second victory of the invalid over circumstances. Jacob sold the apartment and spent all the proceeds on medical treatment in Germany. Before leaving, he called his ex-wife, Adriana. "I'm going abroad for a long time. And before leaving, I would like to see my son." Because the young woman thought the court's decision was unfair. She said with undisguised dislike, "I think you and I have already discussed this issue. Of course, I can't forbid you to see Liam, but you must come, and I'll take Liam for a walk." The man had prepared a considerable sum of money in advance, which he intended to give to his wife during the meeting. He went to the date in a cab, accompanied by his nurse. From afar, he noticed Agnia waiting for him at the entrance. Her 3-year-old son was cowering next to his mother. They were making something out of twigs. Jacob had not seen his son for a long time, and his breath immediately caught. A suspicious sand appeared in his eyes. In a quiet voice, the man called out to his son, "Liam, come to Daddy." The little boy looked at his father with huge eyes, and then shifted his gaze to his mother. "My mom is my dad." She pushed the child towards the car. "Yes, Liam. He's the one with the idea. He brought you the car." Jacob felt awkward because he had completely forgotten that children are supposed to be given toys. Adriana looked at him defiantly, and then he remembered the envelope. "Liam, Daddy's legs are sick, and he can't go to the store to buy a car. There's money in this envelope, and Mommy will buy you anything you want." Adriana literally snatched the envelope from his hands and immediately counted the money. Her thin lips pressed together. She squeezed it all out of her. "Yes, that's all I can give for now. But you sold the apartment. All the money will go to your treatment. It may seem strange to you, but I really want to learn to walk again and live a normal life." The woman said with a kind of gloating gloat that you'll never make it. You'll only waste your money. Varvary all this time sat silently in the back seat of the car. When Adriana expressed in such a strange form about expensive treatment, the girl did not hold back. "How can you talk like that? You have no heart. What if you were in Jacob's shoes?" The ex-wife came closer to the car and looked into the cabin. "Who's that yapping in there? Wow, Jacob, you've already replaced me. And all you do is complain about your health, pretty lady. Remember, I'll never be in a wheelchair because my head is in the right place." Adriana looked at Betty with dislike once more and returned to her original seat. But the presence of the young girl in the car had dealt a serious blow to her ego, and she decided to get back at her invalid husband. In a deliberately loud voice, Adriana commanded Liam, "We have to go home. Daddy has to go too." The boy sat on his father's lap, and he clearly did not feel like following his mother's orders. Jacob pleaded with him, "Why do you do this to me? Just let me be with my son for a little while." The woman pulled the child out of the car. "You don't make new sons." Liam wrenched himself out of his mother's arms and yelled loudly, wanting his daddy. But Adriana, ignoring the child's tantrums, dragged him toward the driveway. It was this wild scene that the man remembered for many years, although after successful treatment he still saw his son several times. Then he learned that Adriana had married some high-profile official and moved to Springfield with him. He did not know her new address, so the visits with his son ceased. Almost a quarter of a century of his life flew before his eyes in an hour-and-a-half flight. Jacob had never analyzed his own mistakes, but now he realized that the main reason for all his hardships and troubles was overconfidence. If it weren't for his inflated ambitions, he wouldn't be so lonely now. Kelly would probably have lived to see today too. At the memory of my mother, a painful prickling under my heart and a thought flashed through my mind. She had indeed given me not only the best years, but also a part of her life. But perhaps all the trials were sent to me from above so that I too could save a man's life, my son's life. This was the question he asked himself for the first time. But there was no time to think about the answer, because the snow-white airliner had already landed and was rolling smoothly along the landing strip. Jacob did not have to waste time waiting for his luggage, because he went on a trip light. The man wanted to get to the hospital where his son was being treated as soon as possible. He headed towards the cab stop but was suddenly called by Jacob. He turned around and saw a woman running towards him, a woman in whom he hardly recognized his ex-wife. By an effort of will, he restrained an exclamation of surprise, and when Adriana approached him, he greeted her politely. "I didn't expect you to meet me. You could have warned me." The woman waved her hand nonchalantly. "Why are you looking at me like that? Have I changed a lot?" "I have a little. You know, Jacob, I don't recognize myself, and I stopped looking in the mirror. But you're not interested in my worries, are you?" The man politely remained silent. "Adriana, as if by the way, I was not going to meet you, but then I thought it would be more convenient for everyone." "Jacob, I don't see why that would be convenient," and who his wife meant by the term everything. But he knew from previous experience that Adriana was better not to ask unnecessary questions. For a few minutes they stood in silence as complete strangers and even looked in different directions. Finally, a free car arrived, and the man decided that it was better to mark the distance at once and sat down on the seat next to the driver. Adriana settled in the back by her frequent breathing. It wasn't hard to guess that she wasn't happy with her placement in the cab. Jacob felt a little sorry for her, and he decided to smooth over the awkwardness from the first moments. Turning around, the man asked, "Adriana, will you tell me in a nutshell what happened to Liam?" This question brought tears to her eyes. The unhappy woman began to speak so fast that her confused speech could not be understood. Jacob tried to stop her. Adriana, I didn't understand anything. Just tell me what's wrong with your son. Just do not rash words, as a hail of deep sighs was heard. Jacob, it's bad. Although the doctor said there's still hope for a change for the better. Well, you know what doctors can say. Personally, I don't believe it. There was more sobbing. And the man gave up trying to talk to his ex-wife. So in complete silence, they drove to the Republican hospital. The man paid the cab driver and headed for the main entrance. Adriana could hardly keep up with him. She was constantly sobbing, howling, and beautifully blurring her tears with a white handkerchief. Noticing her ex-husband headed for the information window, the woman said quietly, "And Liam fell off his motorcycle. He has a serious head injury. He's in intensive care now, but they won't let him in. But we can talk to the doctor." Adriana just nodded and led the man through the corridors, near a door with a sign saying that no outsiders were allowed to enter. The woman took a breath. "I came yesterday, and I was here this morning too. They wouldn't let me see him, only through the partition. The doctor said that Liam is in a medically induced sleep. He also said there was little hope." Jacob suddenly drew the woman to him and began to comfort her. But there was still some chance. If there wasn't, the doctor would have told you to reason well, because you've always been at a distance and you don't know what it's like when your child is dying. He pulled the woman sharply away from him. "You must have forgotten the circumstances under which you and I parted, haven't you? I know what it's like to lie there like a log when you've been cut out of your life by the person closest to you." Adriana let out her thorns too, comparing myself to my son. The door with the warning sign swung open, and springing out with that gate came the medic, donning overalls. As he passed by, he asked Jacob, "Which of our patients are you interested in?" "Liam." The doctor raised his eyes to the ceiling, going over the personal details of his patients. But it wasn't Adriana who spoke up. "I'm sorry, doctor, there's been a slight error. Liam, my ex-husband, didn't know my son had changed his name." The doctor looked at the visitor and invited him to follow him. Jacob detained his ex-wife for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me you changed your last name? How mean and lowly of you. After that, I don't even want to talk to you." The woman had to swallow this remark because they had already entered behind the doctor, and the resident whimpered after a short pause said, "And I understand that you are the parents of our extreme. It is to be carried so much that almost alive. I must tell you that your son's condition has not yet stabilized, so we can't make any predictions. But in any case, you'll have to be patient and hope for the best." "Excuse me, I have some sick people waiting." Jacob asked if we could see our son. "Actually, there's no visiting patients in the ICU. But as an exception, I can allow someone alone for 5 minutes." Adriana spoke up. "Let father come through. I'm afraid I can't take it. This whole environment terrifies me." The woman grabbed the doctor's arm. "Can you just tell me what the consequences will be? Will Liam be able to walk or?" The doctor carefully removed the woman's hand and, with obvious irritation, said, "I explained to you that the current state of the patient does not allow to make any predictions. But it seems to me that the most important thing is that the guy is alive." Just as quickly, the doctor left the office and invited Jacob to come with me. Familiar odors hit his nose, and the man immediately remembered the days when he himself lay motionless in a hospital bed. The doctor led him into a small room where he saw a man whose head was covered in bandages and various apparatuses connected to his arms and chest. The instruments nodded quietly, and the monotonous sounds made him uncomfortable. Just a 5-minute reminder. "He's asleep now, but you can sit next to him." The doctor walked out the door. Jacob cautiously crouched on the edge of the chair. He took the young man's vital hand and stared intently at the features of his face. "Liam, this is how you grew up without me. Perhaps you wouldn't have gotten into trouble if I had been there." Suddenly, the boy's eyelids fluttered and began to rise slowly. Behind the misty gaze of gray eyes stopped on Jacob's face sharply, and the lips whispered, "Who are you?" "I'm your father." Liam made an attempt at a smile. "No, my father is different." and the last thing I'd want is to see him. Liam, you can't say I'm your real father. Jacob, don't you remember me at all? The guy tried to smile again. Yes, I recognize you now. Only you've changed a lot since the last time I saw you. A nurse came into the room. Is it time for you to go? Jacob shook his son's hand. Liam, you be strong. Everything will be all right. The girl asked in surprise, is our patient awake? Without waiting for an answer, she ran out of the room. Molly, call Arthur. Tell him that the patient is awake. Jacob had no sooner left the room than the paramedics came rushing in. The last to arrive was a familiar doctor. Are you still here? Go away or I won't let you see your son again. Adriana was waiting for her ex-husband in the lobby, but she looked a little calmer and more confident than half an hour ago. What's up? How's he doing? Fine, I think. We even talked to him. The woman shrieked and gesticulated vigorously. How can anyone be called normal after a trauma like that? He was coming around yesterday too, but he didn't recognize me. I have a gut feeling. It tells me it's going to end badly. Jacob couldn't take the fire. Bad for who? For you or for Liam? The woman gasped as if she had gills under her skin. What's the difference? Well, let's say for me. My husband, and I still have a daughter, and I can't leave her to fend for herself. This is so bad timing. What am I gonna do if he becomes an invalid? I've got to do something about moving. The man was surprised. You're leaving. Jacob, I don't know what to do. It's all coming to a head. That damn accident. I didn't tell you that Liam on the motorcycle made a mistake. At least he remembered to wear his helmet. The temper's out of control. He and Emily were fighting. Emily is Liam's fiancée, so he's trying to prove something to her. I told him a long time ago that this wayward girl wasn't for him. But do grown sons listen to their mothers? Jacob felt like his mind was a mess. Adriana, please stop for a moment. I still don't understand the connection between the accident and the move. Yes, it's a direct connection. My husband's been raising this region for over a decade. And finally an opportunity came up to take a post in Washington. And then there's this accident that my son always does everything out of spite. Jacob raised his voice. Stop being hysterical. You're a mother. How can you talk about your son like that? Let your husband go to Washington alone, and you stay with your son. I can't leave my husband alone. He's helpless. And you know, ex-husband, I've paid too much for family stability. But you don't understand that. The man clenched his fists. He really wanted to say everything in the eyes of this egoist, but to make a scandal in the hospital walls, he did not want to. So he whispered to me quietly, you haven't changed a bit. You're the same bitch who left me helpless once, and now you want to abandon your son to his fate. Go away. I can't take care of myself. The man never even looked at his ex-wife again. But Adriana followed him outside for a while. Jacob, you must understand me. I'm just a weak woman, and I can't bear such a burden. It was the ex-wife's lamentations that made the blood in his veins run cold and made him dizzy. To get rid of her, he stopped a cab. Chief, where do you have a cheap hotel here? The driver didn't even look at the passenger. The most budget-friendly place is a hostel. Although the comfort there is minimal, but the prices are cheap. You can stay there for a few days. The cab driver took him to the very outskirts of the city, where he settled in the third category of the hotel. The room was for 3 people, but there were no companions. Jacob decided to take a short walk to put his thoughts in order. For the umpteenth time in the last few days, Jacob remembered his mother. He wandered through the park and mentally talked to her. What a pity, Mom, that you are not around right now. Would you tell me what to do? I can't go away and leave Liam alone in this hospital. Since Kelly was in another world, she could not tell her son the right thing to do. The man sat down on the bench and breathed in the fresh air. Suddenly, the cell phone rang. Jacob rejoiced. At least someone remembered me. As it turned out, at this late hour, he decided to bother Peter. Jacob, you promised to call. How's it going in there? Not much. Peter's son is in serious condition. That's why I can't come back yet. You don't worry about work and signal me if you need anything. After all, we're friends, comrades, and friends are supposed to help. Thank you, Peter. I'm sorry to ask, but I really can't do without help. Jacob briefly told Peter about the situation. The station master listened and inserted his comments. What a horror. How else does the earth bear such women? Yes, your Adriana does not deserve to be called a woman. You, James, don't get upset. Be with your son as long as it takes. We'll figure something out about the money. I'll talk to the men. After talking to the station master, he felt a little better, and the man went to the hotel. The next morning, he was already in the hospital at 7:00 a.m., but contrary to expectations, he was not allowed into the intensive care unit. A nurse popped out for a moment and quickly mouthed, "Arthur did not tell you to let you in." The girl wanted to hide behind the transparent door again, but the man stopped her. "What's the matter? Everything seemed fine yesterday. We even talked to my son. He got worse during the night. But don't be upset. It happens with injuries like this." The nurse left, and Jacob stayed in the lobby. He spent the whole day waiting, and only in the evening another doctor came to see him. "Are you the father?" And Jacob, and to himself, because the foreign surname cut the hearing. "Yes, doctor, tell me, how is he a doctor?" Did he look away? "Unfortunately, I have nothing to tell you. Your son's condition has deteriorated dramatically, but we haven't given up hope. I can see him." "All right, come on in." The doctor said it as if he was giving permission to see a doomed man for the last time. But it must have been so, because Liam's body was convulsing, and the medics did not leave his side. And only the complex apparatuses responsible for important functions were beeping nastily all the time. But these sounds didn't seem so nasty to the unhappy father, because they said that his son was fighting for life. Jacob did not remember leaving the hospital. He wandered the streets of the unfamiliar city for a long time again, and then went to the park. He did not hold back his tears. Lord, is there really no way of escape? But why is everything like this? First me, and now the son. All of them. Because, by the way, you and your son have the same fate. Jacob felt as if that voice came from hell itself. He jumped up like scalded, and only then noticed nearby a female silhouette hiding in the shadows of the trees. In the twilight, the apparition was ominous. But the stranger reassured him, "Don't be afraid of me, and they have caused you no harm. All your troubles have already fallen on your head. Now your pool is under attack, but it will survive. If you find someone who helped you, protected you, and cared about you. You ignored all that and just moved on. She was the only one who believed in you, and you'll have grandchildren. Don't let love get in the way. Love heals." This woman did not look like a gypsy, but her voice immediately reminded him of what he had been told. For several minutes, the man stood in a daze. He wanted to shift, but his feet felt as if they were stuck to one place. He thought that the fortune teller hypnotized him, because everything further happened as if in a dream. Jacob could not remember how he got to the hotel. Only in the morning he came to his senses completely. His hand automatically reached for his cell phone, and the man was surprised to find that he had 5 missed calls. The number seemed familiar to him, but he could not remember who it belonged to. He had to make a return call. Clara answered cheerfully. "Jacob, you finally found it. I wasn't hiding anywhere. It's just that my son was watching me last night, and I didn't hear your calls, but it's still nice to hear your voice, especially since I forgot to thank you for the pies." The woman wondered which pies were the same ones you treated me to just a few days ago. "Remember my birthday?" "Oh yes, so much happens around here every day, you'd forget your own name. Jacob Peter has written you a bonus, and I'll transfer it to your account tonight so you can get the money, because you really need the money right now." "Thank you, Clara. I'm really struggling financially at the moment." I didn't realize I'd have to stay in Springfield, so I have to stay in a hotel, which is an extra expense. Jacob, I don't feel comfortable intruding on your personal life, but I can help you with accommodations. The thing is, my father's aunt is a distant relative in Springfield. She's still chipper, grandmotherly, and very kind. If you'd like, I could give her a call and let her know. It's kind of awkward. No, it's fine. Aunt Evelyn's let tenants in before. She says it makes her life more fun. Julia's my daughter, by the way. She goes to school in Springfield. That last point was crucial, and Jacob agreed to take Clara's advice. He did not postpone the move to the next day and quickly packed his things. Julia wasn't surprised to see a man on the doorstep. Come in. Mom called, asking to be received with all honors. The cashier's daughter looked more like a teenager than a grown-up girl, but this resemblance gave her a special charm. Uncle Jacob, don't be sorry. We have conditions here that are far from civilized. I'm not picky. I just need a place to lay my head. Julia took him to a small room. I ran to my grandmother's neighbor. Soon she'll be on the street for our chief informant. If he questions you, you keep quiet. Thanks for the advice. Julia, can I ask you what? How do you find someone you haven't seen in over 20 years? There's even a show about that. You could also try social media. The man spread his hands in confusion. Alas, I am not friends with such technology as a computer, but a regular phone with great difficulty mastered. Surprising. And I thought you were advanced. You're a former athlete. When I was young, there was no such technology. The girl's brow soon made a mixed grimace. What am I gonna do with you? You'll have to help me find on a piece of paper the data of the person I need to find. The man complied with the girl's request, and Julia promised, I'll try to find your Betty. And you're bored with the TV, aren't you? But Jacob had no sooner settled down near the TV than the landlady appeared. The old woman shouted Kelly apartment from the door. Our arrival was heard from the back of the house. Yes, Grandma Evelyn. He's sitting in the hall, waiting for you. Why didn't you feed the man? You're the hostess. This roll call slightly raised Jacob's mood, and he went out into the hallway, where Evelyn changed into slippers. Hello, it's me, the tenants. The old lady threw the man an appraising glance and a satisfied one from the advertisement. Nothing, the kid's good, and the height is good. This time the man could not contain laughter, but the hostess's merriment seemed suspicious. Why did you get so excited? I beg your pardon. I in no way wanted to offend you. It's just that no one has called me a clapper in a long time. It didn't take Aunt Evelyn long to answer, did it? For me, all men are like children. They live to see gray hairs, and still they act like boys. Like my late husband. Julia warned the guest of her sad fate. Evelyn, you'll tell Jacob about your husband, and the neighbors too. Let's have dinner. My stomach was cramping. Evelyn immediately turned her attention to her granddaughter. Young people are not normal these days. Julia's been living the wrong kind of life, sitting at the computer late into the night. How many times have I told Clara to influence the girl? But my words fly off the wall like peas. The older woman suddenly froze with her mouth open. Julia commented, but that's it. Uncle Jacob, the interrogation will now begin. Evelyn CEC. All right, the girl. And you stay out of the way. The old woman turned to the guest. Tell me, what are your intentions about my Clara? The man almost choked and had to take a drink of water. Only then did he answer. Evelyn, I don't quite understand you. Clara and I just work in the same organization and live in the same city. The older woman was clearly disappointed by this answer. Pity, because I thought Clara had finally met her man. She'd only been married a short time. She got a bastard. He took her daughter and ran away. Julia screamed, Evelyn, how many times can you bring up this story? And where did you get such words? The old lady parried from you. You say such things on the phone with your girlfriends that my ears wither. Despite the heated arguments between the relatives, the atmosphere in the house was relaxed and calm. The last time Jacob had experienced a similar feeling was during his youth at the mother house. He didn't hold back. How good you have, Julia promised. It will be even better if you find common ground with Valia. If you have removed the hunger, let's go to my room. I've dug a little for you there. The man stared at the girl with an uncomprehending look. Julia laughed. Oh, you're so full of it. You asked me to find Betty, and you've already forgotten. The girl looked at him. Uncle Jacob, tell me honestly, why do you need this Betty to save my son? Jacob, not knowing why, told about his trouble to the girl, who reminded him of a teenager. Julia listened with bated breath. When he stopped talking, she said confidently, I know how to find your Betty, though I don't think she'll be much help to your son. Uncle Jacob, can I come with you to the hospital? Maybe I can help your son. Jacob agreed to this proposal, although he did not know how this girl could help Julia. Julia showed him several pictures, and Jacob confidently pointed to one. That's definitely her. Wow. She, it turns out, has a better understanding of the modern world than I do. Julia smiled, clicked something, and started talking. Apparently, Betty is single, and judging by the photos, she has no children. Oh, I feel like I'm not getting a mom. As soon as she finds out I'm helping you find women, let's not tell her anything. Well, let it be our little secret. Jacob smiled. He felt like he was at home here now, in his childhood. Of course, let it be. Especially since I have a strictly working relationship with your mom. That's you and Mom. Mom has a completely different relationship with you. Although, you know, I think she's kind of fixated on you and doesn't see anything around her. Uncle been following her around for a long time. Uncle is very nice. He's so real. And he loves Mom. And he doesn't even stop you from suffering. Jacob sighed. You know, Julia, I'm used to living alone. I'm afraid to imagine having someone around all the time. Julia turned to him. You can't do that. You know, a man shouldn't live alone. Well, he can live alone, but there must be someone else in his life. Do you know why lone wolves are so feared? Because they're angry at everyone. They're dangerous. Jacob raised his hands all. Julia, I get it. As soon as Liam feels better, I'll definitely look for my man. But I don't have time for that now. Julia turned to the computer. So let's write her a letter. Apparently she's not on the net that often. She was 2 days ago. But let's hope it doesn't take too long. Say we found her. She'll write us back. And then what? You ask her to come over. Maybe she's got a job, a career. It could be anything. And I'll tell you more. Jacob lowered his head, as if gathering his thoughts. You see, then, when I was young, I also met a fortune teller, though I should probably start with something else. First I met a coach. I didn't speak well with him, because I owed everything to him. Then I met a fortune teller who basically told me the same thing he did, but also added that very soon I would be just as unhappy as I am now. I'll not deny I was impressed by her words. Only I didn't heed them. I probably wouldn't have been able to change anything. Now another fortune teller. The most interesting thing, I didn't see her, but her voice was exactly the same as the one in the hall. You see, she said that I had given my fate to my son, and that only Betty could help. I have no idea if she'll tell me what to do or how to behave or what to say. But I need to find her, I know that for sure. Julia listened to him mesmerized. As it turned out, they had another listener they hadn't noticed. Evelyn walked into the room and sat down on the couch. Though my opinion is not asked here, I'll tell you. I had an acquaintance, and a gypsy woman said something to her, and the acquaintance just sent her away, and everything started coming true for her. She went to the gypsies herself, and they told her that you can't just dismiss gypsy predictions as shaky. There they told her that gypsy predictions are shaky, and if the gypsy woman herself spoke, it is still possible to fix something. If she had listened then, she would have gotten out of it. But now it's too late. She freaked out again, yelling, "How much money should I give you so you wouldn't do such things?" But the old gypsy woman just shook her head and said that if she wanted to, she could give them all the money because she wouldn't need it anymore. To top it all off, she was hit by a car the same evening, and she certainly didn't need the money anymore. Her own children turned her in a wheelchair into a hospice, having previously done all the paperwork that she was not herself. That's where she died a year later. What's my point? If the fortune teller said that something can be fixed, you have to grab and go ahead. Jacob smiled with a kind of relief. You know, I'm so at ease with you. Are you like yourselves? Are you worried? Grandma Evelyn stood up. I'm disappointed you're not going to marry Clara, but you seem like a good man. So I wish you well. Jacob's up. Thank you very much. Grandma turned to Julia. And it's time for you to go to bed, Dragonfly. It's past midnight. Julia laughed. There is my general. And then Jacob winked as well. Early in the morning, Jacob headed to the hospital. The doctor invited him into his office. Is there any change? The doctor nodded. Honestly, I don't know where to begin. As you realize, yesterday was a crisis. Your son was going through a period of crisis that he might not have gotten out of, but somehow we got through it. Jacob jumped. So Liam will live. The doctor nodded. Wait, rejoice. I won't go into details. I'll put it in my own words. At times like this, the brain is practically fighting itself. It examines the body and sees what can be shut down so that the rest can function without problems. This time, the brain shut down the legs. You see, we did the surgery. How can I explain it to you? Physically, mechanically, practically. But the brain is so poorly understood, you never know what to expect from it. So he shut down his legs at the moment of crisis. Your son won't get back on his feet, just so you understand. Jacob was silent for a long time, and the words were in his head. Your son is repeating your fate. But he did it. He got up, so Liam will get up. It was as if the doctor was waiting for something from him. Jacob's up. I heard you, doctor. We'll fight. I'm sure we'll make it. I didn't realize you weren't leaving. And now I didn't realize where I should go if my Liam is in this condition. The doctor spread his hands. The thing is, Liam's mother, your ex-wife, left today. Warned her not to be disturbed because she and her family are traveling far away. Jacob collapsed in his chair. What a bunch of bastards, though I'm not used to it. She did the same thing to me once, but I thought she couldn't leave her son. I want you to know, I'll never leave Liam. We haven't seen each other since we were kids, so I cherish every minute of it. They stood up the doctor and shook his hand. And Jacob dared to ask, tell me, is there any chance? The doctor looked at him carefully. I could lie to you, tell you about the young body and all that. But I'll be honest, it's a 1 in 100,000 chance. Usually, these injuries leave a person permanently disabled. But there's a 1 in 100,000 chance. The doctor smiled sadly. I sincerely wish that you will be the one to get that chance. Jacob asked permission for someone else to come in. And the doctor said to the nurse, take a pass. How many do you need? We allow access to bedridden patients at any time. You know, there's a staff shortage, like everywhere else. So when relatives are around, it is much easier for the patient both mentally and physically. He stopped in front of the room. The doctor said that Liam is conscious today. Jacob took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Liam lay motionless, his head renamed a medical collar around his neck. Hello, son. Liam looked at him surprised, then smiled faintly. I thought I was dreaming about you. Did Jacob sit down next to you? No, I came straight over as soon as Mom called me. She was gone. Jacob averted his eyes, but then looked directly into his son's eyes. Yes, she's gone, but that doesn't mean anything. I'll be by your side as long as you want me to be. Why? It's not like we haven't seen each other. You don't know me at all, but you're my son. How can I not know you? Liam was silent for a while. Then he asked, it was Mom who divorced you? Yes. Why? Jacob was confused. Hadn't she told him anything? then thought that it was not in Adriana's interest to tell the truth. I was playing hockey. I was at the height of my fame. And then I got hurt, and I was in a wheelchair. My mom told me straight up she didn't want me like that. You didn't leave me. No, son. I really wanted to see you, but Adriana was against it. She was very offended when I didn't give her our apartment, and even more offended when I spent my share on medical treatment instead of giving it to her. She told me a different version of how you kicked her out with a small child. That's why I didn't try to contact you. I realize now that I always knew about Mom. Okay, let's not talk about that. Jacob cheerfully stroked his arm. They talked some more and Liam fell asleep. Jacob went out. So we need to buy something, some vitamins, something healthy. He went to the nurse, asked for a pass, and what to bring for his son. Oh, I just prepared a list of what you can, what you need, and what you can't. Jacob smiled. I'm beginning to think that your city has the most sympathetic people. That's true, the girl laughed. But it's true. We don't just have the kindest people. We also have the most wonderful city. Julia immediately expressed a desire to go shopping with him. Uncle Jacob, you're bound to buy something wrong. And you don't check the expiration date. I always check everything. Julia, you probably have your own thing going on. It doesn't matter. Think of me as taking over you and Liam's patronage. And then I'll come with you to the hospital, so you can meet us. You realize that Liam will be in bed for a long time, and you'll be the only ones to visit him. It's so boring, you could die of boredom. So I'll take care of the entertainment part. Jacob sighed heavily. Julia, there is one more thing. I understand that Liam doesn't know yet, and doesn't know what will happen when he does. The doctor said that Liam will never get back on his feet again. Julia's eyes got huge, and then she whispered, Lord, we must support him with all our strength. In the evening, she and Julia, laden with bags, with special underwear, with fruit and yogurt, showed up at the hospital again. Liam, welcoming the guests, Liam looked at Julia in surprise. The girl was running around the ward like there were 100 batteries. This is Julia. She's the daughter of my colleague at work. And now I'm staying with her grandmother. Julia is my son, Liam. I can't say anything else, because I don't know anything yet. Liam smiled, but there is nothing to tell. I graduated from the university and got a job in a good firm. My mom's husband wasn't very pleased, because according to his calculations, I should have gone to work for his friend. But I was interested in money and career equally in the place where he was sending me. You could expect neither. I have a girlfriend, very beautiful, smart, ambitious. We had a fight with her the day It was my own fault. You have to be able to control yourself. Emily's a good person. We're getting married. I think she's gonna show up today. She's probably gone to her parents' house. Emily sometimes does that when we fight. Julia interrupted him. Do you have your own apartment? No, not yet. I rent an apartment, and we live there. Emily is not very happy, of course. She'd like us to move into our own apartment after we get married. But that's still a dream. Julia and Jacob looked at each other, but did not have time to say anything. A girl literally burst into the room, and Jacob and Julia immediately realized who it was. Emily was really very beautiful. Capriciously curved lips, high forehead, well-defined eyebrows and eyes huge, very skillfully painted and cold. She stepped over her feet in high-heeled shoes so confidently that it was immediately obvious. These were her everyday clothes. Julia gazed at her in admiration and could not even say a word. She could only dream of such outfits, such shapes. Liam smiled at Emily. I've been waiting for you. Jacob clenched his eyes. He suddenly realized what was about to happen. Your son is going to repeat your fate. He must stop this Vika. But how can he not force her to be with Liam? Liam, you know I don't like to be kept in suspense. You realize that I dreamed that we would both build a career, buy an apartment, a car, live well, and have a nice family. As you realize, you ruined all the plans. Liam tried to get a word in edgewise. But he didn't. Just moved them a little bit. Here, I'll recover from the hospital, and we'll start to realize them right away. Emily even banished. Why are you trying to trick me? Or maybe you think I'll be with you out of pity. No, Liam. I don't. Husband's an invalid. Find some other fool who'll be willing to carry your pots for you. What handicapped person? What are you talking about? They haven't told you yet. I guess they haven't had time. You, Liam, are no longer human. You're an invalid. You'll never walk again. The money we've been saving for the apartment, I'm taking it. First of all, my money is there, and secondly, it will be compensation for your deception. The girl promptly left the room, slamming the door. There was a pinched silence in the room. Then Liam asked softly, Mom knew. Jacob realized that his confession would finally break his son and did not know what to say. Liam said slowly, So she knew. So she left me, just like she left you when. The boy closed his eyes. And Julia suddenly said, I always thought that there are no weak people. They're made up, because I've always been surrounded by strong people, boys who don't cry when they break their knees, women who were abandoned by their husbands, and they fought their own battles, raised their children, whose husbands abandoned their wives. And so did they. I learned today that weak people do exist. They're the ones who would rather just run away so they don't have to bother with anything. Amoebas. I'm talking about Vika and your mother. Liam. I'm sorry. Liam, who had been lying there with his eyes closed, looked at her in surprise. Then he looked at his father. Will you tell me how you got through all this? Dassin. Of course I will. While driving home, Julia was silent, but as soon as we got in, she started talking, even gesticulating. You can't give up. We have to do something, you know. Understanding Julia. Of course we'll do something. Only I understand. The dwelling where Adriana lived with her husband belonged to the husband, and she left her son without anything helpless. I'm still amazed at that woman. But that's okay. We'll go home. We'll manage somehow. I work on the railroad for a reason. We'll figure something out. Julia sat down at the computer. Oh, Uncle Jacob. Betty answered. He quickly sat down next to her. What's she writing? She's checking out tomorrow morning. Like she's checking out. Julia turned to him. You know, you men, are you so bad at explaining things? A year will pass before you explain everything. I wrote her another message last night after everyone went to bed. I told her everything in detail, and she's already booked a ticket to Springfield today. She's asking for the address. Jacob jumped up. Oh, what are we gonna do? We'll have to get her a hotel. Grandma Evelyn had a way of appearing silently and out of nowhere. Why? Don't I have a place to stay? We're all tied up in one case. God help the boy out. Jacob couldn't help himself, hugged the older woman tightly, and kissed her cheek. She laughed, brushed it off. Oh, I cannot. This is how many years I have not been in the arms of men. And seriously, you're a good man, Jacob. It's a shame I can't help you. Really, if you married Clara, you'd be worth a fortune. The three of them laughed. By evening the next day, leaving Liam in the care of Julia, who wouldn't let him get bored, Jacob went to the train station to pick up Betty. He was nervous for some reason. He remembered how they parted. He and his moms were standing at the foot of the train. When Betty came running in, she was panting and dreaming. You're leaving altogether? Jacob nodded. Yes, there's nothing more for me to do here. Betty looked at him strangely and pressed her whole body against him. It was so sudden that Jacob woke up and wrapped both arms around Betty to keep from falling, and she whispered, You know if you need me, you just call me. And Betty ran away. Mama said, Why do you love you so much, girl? But Jacob said glumly, Enough with the love game. They never saw each other again. Jacob had no idea how Varia's life had turned out. At first he remembered her and even felt sad without her. But then he forgot. He turned his head and could not see a familiar face. Jacob's neck did not hurt. He stared in amazement at the woman who stood next to him and smiled. Very, she really was unrecognizable. It was as if Betty had gotten taller. Plus, she had gotten the shapes that she used to have so much less. She is dressed in a stylish fashion. There's a big brown suitcase next to her and a big bag in her hands. So you're just gonna stand there with a glass. Or shall we say hello? Jacob, as if awake, hugged her, said thank you for coming. But I could not come. Take your suitcase. Where can I stay? But if you don't mind, not very modern life. Grandma Evelyn invited you to her place. That's Julie's grandmother, right? I understood that both the grandmother and Julia are good people. Jacob nodded eagerly. Larry, they are very good. Or maybe I should call you by your middle name. Betty stopped, looked at him. Let's assume it's a joke. Jacob was embarrassed. I'm sorry, please. So tell me, Jacob, what's your life like? Oh, nothing much. I live, I work. Mom, not anymore. Sorry, nothing, Betty. Tell me, will you help me with my son? I don't know yet, but I really hope so. Apparently, Jacob had a look of incredulity in his eyes and suddenly asked, And you wrote to me because the fortune teller frightened you. You don't know what I do. No. What do you do? Betty smiled. Well, you'll find out soon enough. The whole evening was spent in conversation. Jacob hardly participated. It was the women who talked. It turned out that Valeria, after he left, decided that she could no longer remain a nurse. She enrolled in an institute and at the same time studied unconventional medicine. It turns out that practical medicine plus unconventional sometimes gives such results that the doctors only divide their hands, but they still refuse to admit that folk methods also work. Betty, what about work? She turned to him with a smile. If you were Sherlock, you'd know that I'm not Betty, but Betty, the owner of a private clinic, which is not so easy to get into, even though people don't believe in unconventional therapies. And the waiting list for my clinic is a year long. Alex struggled to put his jaw back in place. I'm very happy for you. But don't think, Jacob. Stop making excuses all the time. Even if you called me just because you knew about the clinic, it would still be okay. You're saving your son. And that's what you're doing. Where's your clinic? Washington, D.C., of course. Grandma Evelyn ordered it. My lovebirds, I think it's time we all hit the sack. The girl's tired from the road. I've put you, Betty, in the big room. The doctor, listening to the barbarian's request to let her see Liam's medical history, squinted. Tell me, why do I get the feeling I've seen you before? She shrugged. I don't know, maybe we might have met on some medical forums. The doctor slapped his forehead. You, Betty. And I listened to your presentation with interest and remember how you rubbed the noses of those who didn't believe the real examples. But how did my patients, or rather their relatives, find you? Betty looked at Jacob, but we've known each other for a very long time. The doctor turned to Jacob. Well, you know, I can definitely tell you now that the odds have gotten much better. I don't really believe in all this either. But there's no smoke without fire. Colleague, come on in. I'll give you all the necessary papers. 2 weeks later, Betty told me to bring Liam to her clinic. Tell her there was hope. She shook her head. I won't say. You see, Jacob, all or almost all of a person's problems are in the head. That's where you need to look for something that will help your son. We may find it quickly. We may never find it. In the evening, Jacob called Peter. I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable talking to you anymore. But I need to move my son to the capital. Jacob, what are you talking about? He's uncomfortable. Let's call me back in an hour and I'll look into it. What's the best way to make this work? Thank you and thank you. Yes, Jacob, talk, Pash. I'm sorry about our conversation. There was a pause in the receiver. Then Peter said, do you remember him? I remember him. But I didn't have the guts to apologize. But now there are no more misunderstandings between us. Don't worry, I'll figure it out. Jacob hung up the phone and felt a little better. An hour later, Peter dictated the number of the train. The conductor is a man and will help them. Jacob hung up the phone and managed to notice that Julia had tears in her eyes. So what happened? Julia stubbornly looked away, but Jacob took her by the chin. Tell me what happened. Julia suddenly snuggled into his shoulder and burst into tears. From her coherent speech, Jacob realized one thing: Julia had fallen in love with Liam. It was so unexpected that Jacob was confused, and then he remembered their goodbye to the accident and pulled Julia away from him. Did you tell him that? No. Why would I tell him? He's probably thinking, why do you need him? Julia looked at Jacob with huge crying eyes. Do you think so? Yes, I think so. Julia jumped up. I have to go to the hospital right away. She ran out of the house like a whirlwind. Jacob just shook his head and immediately heard, trying to make sure your son doesn't repeat your fate. He didn't hear when she walked in. Betty grinned, trying to keep him from making the same mistakes I did. Julia came back almost overnight, eyes brightening, the smile never leaving her lips. She walked up to Jacob and poked him in the nose. Thank you, Uncle Jacob. I will come to Washington on vacation to visit Liam. Evelyn hummed indignantly, but Julia gave her a look that made the words hunt. The left-handed old lady chose to remain silent. Here, Liam, let's take a few more steps and rest on the bench. Julia, I don't want to rest. You don't want to, but you will. And that's out of the question. It's been a little over 3 months since Liam was brought to the capital. Julia was coming for the second time, and Liam was happy to see her as if she were his own. Jacob was due to arrive today, and they went out to the clinic park to meet him. They sat down on the bench, and Liam asked, do you think Dad will ever decide to propose to Betty? Julia shook her head. I don't think so. You realize that he had offended her once, even if unknowingly, and now she's so important, so famous. Liam sighed. Isn't there anything we can do to help them? No, Liam, there should be no help in this kind of thing. They're adults. Liam sighed again. And you, Julia? Julia looked at him in surprise. What am I? When you marry me, the girl's hands trembled, and she answered as calmly as possible. But no one has called me there yet. Liam squinted slyly. You said you always know I don't want yogurt or soup. Liam, but it's food. But you know. So you must know that I want you to be my wife. And Julia smiled, but she didn't have time to say anything, because Liam spoke quickly. Julia, I can't offer you anything yet. I will fight very hard to get back to normal life, to work, so that you don't know the need for anything. God, you're so stupid. Not everything is measured in money. Nearby, the fallen leaves rustled, and the young ones saw Jacob and Betty. Daddy, we've been waiting for you. I don't know how we didn't see them. Jacob flip-flopped embarrassedly. I arrived yesterday. There were some things to do. Julia looked at an embarrassed Betty. No way. Did you finally propose? Jacob looked at them apprehensively. How do you know? Betty and Liam laughed merrily, followed by Betty. And then Jacob couldn't help himself. He hadn't laughed in a long time. Just like that. Not because he had to. Jacob, Liam, what are you doing here? They turned and stared at Agnes. Adriana's mother threw them a glance, then glared. Liam grinned at the mother. If you're looking for a stroller, there isn't one. I get around on my own legs. Adriana pretended to wipe her eyes. She cuddled up to Liam. My son, I prayed for you every day. We don't have to. We know perfectly well that we don't. Adriana pulled away. She said calmly, how did you get here through people you know? They say they use all sorts of grandmotherly conspiracies here. Can you talk to someone to help me? Can you imagine this one? Anyway, I'm getting a divorce. He's found someone young. I need him to be sentenced. Or talk, whatever it's called. You can't refuse me because your sister and your mother's happiness is at stake. But I don't even know what you're talking about. What conspiracies? Liam, is it hard for you to do something for your mother? All right, tell me who I can approach. And I'll tell you that your mom's a Betty. Woman, you need to get your own head treated, not your husband. Adriana responded with defiance. Mind your own business. I am the owner of this clinic, and I can tell you for a fact that this place will not help you." Betty turned to Julia for treatment. "Julia, help him." Lee turned around, took Jacob under her arm, and they all moved towards the hospital. Adriana remained standing. Her lips moved. She heard curses in the back of those leaving. What you wish for people comes back to you doubly. Good for good, evil for evil. Adriana flinched and saw an old gypsy woman standing beside her. The woman could have sworn there had been no one there a second ago. The gypsy woman looked at her calmly. "Aya, fuck you all." Adriana rushed toward the exit of the park without looking back, so as not to see those piercing black eyes.